Hello everyone, we are the group 2 and we will going to discuss about the stakeholders involved in clinical trials and their responsibilities and also the documents needed or required to be compiled with in clinical trials. So first, we have the stakeholders, which is their responsibilities is to ensure that all the 13 principles of ICH GCP are complied with. The Institutional Review Board, or IEC, Independent Ethics Committee, investigator, and sponsor are the key stakeholders, and other stakeholders such as the regulator, contract research organization, hospital or clinic, auditor, clinic research coordinator, or clinic research associate, data and safety monitoring board, subjects, and etc. are also have important roles during the life cycle of trial conduct. Here we have the 13 principles na kailangang makomply nila. We have the ethics, trial risk versus trial benefit, trial participants, information on the medicinal product, good quality trials, compliance with the study protocol, medical decisions, trial staff, informed consent, clinical trial data, confidentiality, good manufacturing practice, and quality assurance. Next, we have the Institutional Review Board or Independent Ethics Committee. So dito, at least 5 of their members yung mag-evaluate ng medical, non-medical, ethical, and legal aspects na involved doon sa trials. Next, for the IRB or IEC responsibilities, dapat ma-maintain nila yung rights, yung safety, and well-being ng kanilang subjects or ng participants, including na yung vulnerable subjects, which is yung mga participants na kailangan ng proper or legal talaga na consent. For example, yung mga minor, yung elders na hindi ganong maintindihan yung rules na involved doon sa investigation na i-undergo nila. And then, to complete yung responsibilities nila, dapat ma-review rin nila yung mga trial protocols amendments, written informed consent, IB or the investigator's brochure, subject recruitment procedures, written information to be provided to subjects, information about the payments and compensation available to subjects, the investigator's current curriculum vitae, and etc. And then, review of a proposed clinical trial by the IRB or IEC should happen within a reasonable time, and the IRB should document its views in writing, clearly identifying the trial and the documents reviewed. IRB minutes should be mentioned the following: approval, modifications required before its approval, disapproval, and termination or suspension of any prior approval. Next, dapat ma-ensure nila na yung safety ng human subjects nila is not jeopardized or not risk. It should conduct a continuing review of each ongoing trial at intervals depending on the degree of risk, but at least once per year. In emergency situations wherein prior consent from the trial subjects or the subject's legally acceptable representative cannot be obtained, the IRB or IEC should ensure that the trial documents meet regulatory requirements for such trials and address ethical concerns. And then dapat din ma-ensure nila sa informed consent form yung mga informations regarding the payment nila to the subjects or participants, ma-review kung magkano yung compensation nila whenever there's problems na mangyayari, and yung methods of payment also. And then dapat naka-prorated basis yung payment nila sa subjects, hindi siya pang isahan na lang na bayad na kapag natapos na yung investigation, saka na nila babayaran yung mga subjects. Next, we have the investigator. And the investigator should comply with the good clinical practice and the applicable regulatory requirements during study conduct. They should be qualified by education, training, and experience, and should provide evidence of such qualifications through curriculum vitae and or other relevant documentation. They should be thoroughly familiar with the use of the investigational product as described in the study documents provided by the sponsors. And then they should permit monitoring and auditing by the sponsor, IRB, IEC, and regulatory authority. They should maintain a list of qualified persons to whom the investigator has delegated significant trial-related duties. Next, we have the investigator's responsibilities in terms of adequate resources for the conduct of the trial. They should be able to demonstrate the potential for recruiting suitable subjects within project timelines. They should have sufficient time to properly conduct and complete the trial within the agreed trial period. they should have an adequate number of qualified staff and adequate facilities for the duration of the trial. And they should ensure that the site team assisting the trial is adequately informed about the protocol, the investigational products, and their trial-related duties and functions. Next, in terms of communication with the IRB or IEC, so before initiating a trial, the investigator should have written and dated approval from the IRB or IEC for the trial protocol, written informed consent form, and subject recruitment procedures such as advertisements. And yung mga investigators, dapat makaprovide sila ng updated copy of IB or investigators brochure doon sa IRB International Review Board. Dito sa IB, dito nakakompile yung mga clinical and non-clinical data about doon sa product na ini-investigate nila. About sa investigational products, yung focus nila. And then, during the trial, the investigator should submit to the IRB IEC all documents subjects to review for approval. Next, in terms of medical care ng kanilang subjects, for all trial-related medication decisions, a qualified physician who is investigator or a sub-investigator for the trial should be responsible. Responsibility rin ng investigator na i-inform yung physician nung subject about sa kanyang participation sa trial, but it is only when the subject agrees to inform his or her physician. And then, kapag naman halimbawa nag-withdraw or nag-back out yung subjects na mag-participate sa trial, hindi siya obliged na magbigay ng reason. Dapat si investigator yung mag-find out kung bakit siya nag-withdraw or kung ano man, while fully respecting their rights. Next, in terms of compliance with protocol, the investigator should conduct the trial in compliance with the protocol agreed to by the sponsor, by the regulatory authority, and which was given approval by the IRB. Dapat kung ano yung nasubmit nila at nabigyan ng approval, yun din yung ifa-follow nila. And then dapat hindi sila mag-i-implement ng mga changes sa protocol nang hindi nag-agree yung mga sponsor and walang approval na galing sa IRB, IEC, except where necessary to eliminate an immediate hazards to trial subjects or when the changes involves only logistical or administrative aspects of the trial. Example, the changes in monitors, changes of telephone numbers. For the investigational products, the responsibility rests with the investigator. Accountability at the trial site. The investigator may assign responsibility for investigational products accountability to a pharmacist who is under supervision of the investigator. The investigational product should be stored as specified by the sponsor and by the applicable regulatory requirement. Dapat ma-ensure nila na yung product is only used in accordance with the approved protocol, and then dapat ma-explain nila yung properly yung correct use ng investigational product sa kanilang mga subjects. For randomization procedures and unblinding, the investigator should follow the trial's randomization procedure, if any, and should ensure that the code is broken only in accordance with the protocol. And in case of premature unblinding in a blinded trial due to a serious adverse event or accidental unblinding, the investigator should promptly document and explain it to the sponsor. Next, in terms of informed consent of trial subjects, it should be obtained and documented on the IRB IEC approved informed consent form. Investigators should adhere to ethical principles having their origin in the Declaration of Helsinki during obtainment of the informed consent. The written informed consent form should be revised whenever important new information becomes available that may be relevant to the subject's consent. Any revised written informed consent form should receive the IRB IEC approval opinion in advance of use. For the records or reports and progress reports, ang mga investigators, sila yung magme-maintain ng adequate and accurate sources of documents, and yung trial records ng mga trial subjects, dapat yung sources ng kanilang data is attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate, and complete. Any changes to sources data should be dated, initiated, traceable, should not be obscure the original entry, and should be explained. This applies to both written and electronic changes. Dapat ma-maintain talaga nila yung mga essential documents for the conduction of the clinical trials, and they should also take measures to prevent the accidental or premature destruction of these documents. Next, the essential documents should be retained until at least 2 years after the last approval of a marketing application in the ICH region, and until there are no pending or contemplated marketing applications in an ICH ICH region or until at least 2 years have elapsed since the formal discontinuation of clinical development of the investigational products. These documents should be detained or retained for a longer period. However, if required by the applicable regulatory requirements or by an agreement with the sponsor, it is the responsibility of the sponsor to inform the investigator or institution as to when these documents no longer need to be retained. Also, dapat always yan sila may available na copies of all trial-related records upon request of monitor, auditor, IRB, IEC, or regulatory authority. And then, every year sila yung magsasubmit ng written progress report sa IRB, IEC regarding the trial status. For the safety reporting, all serious adverse events should be reported immediately to the sponsor except those serious adverse events that the protocol identifies as not needing immediate report. The immediate report should be followed promptly by detailed written reports. And then, lahat ng adverse events or the laboratory abnormalities na na-identify nila which is critical to safety evaluations should be reported to the sponsor. For premature termination or suspension of a trial, if the trial is prematurely terminated or suspended for any reason, the investigator should promptly inform the trial subjects and should assure follow-up and appropriate therapy for the subjects. And then for final reports by investigator, upon completion of the trial, the investigator should inform the institution and should provide the IRB, IEC with a summary of the trial's outcome and to the regulatory authority where applicable with any reports required with the help of sponsor.
The sponsor is an individual, company, institution, or organization that takes responsibility for the initiation, management, or financing of clinical trial. Responsibilities of the sponsor: quality assurance and quality control. The sponsor is responsible for implementing and maintaining quality assurance and quality control systems with the written standard operating procedure or the SOP. When you say SOP, ito yung set of written instruction na nag-describe ng step-by-step procedure para ma-perform mo properly yung procedure ng clinical trials. Also, to ensure that the trials are conducted and the data are generated, documented, and reported in compliance with the protocol. The SOP, the GCP, and the applicable regulatory requirements. Also, ang quality control kay gina-apply po ni siya sa each stage of data handling para ma-ensure na katong data na na-gathered mo is reliable and have been processed correctly. Contract Research Organization Selection. A sponsor may transfer any or all of its trial-related duties and functions that should be specified in writing to a CRO but should ensure continuous oversight of activities done by the CRO. It is also includes those that are subcontracted to other party by the CRO. And the ultimate responsibility for the quality and integrity of the trial data always resides with the sponsor. Medical expertise. The sponsor should designate appropriately qualified medical personnel internally or appoint outside consultant to advise on trial-related medical questions. Also, na dapat ang sponsor kay mag-provide po siya or mangita po siya sa mga qualified nga medical personnel para sa consultant or para mag-advise on clinical-related medical questions. Trial design. The sponsor should utilize qualified individuals. Of course, kailangan gid ng sponsor na mag-provide siya ng mga qualified individuals or personnel as appropriate throughout all stages of trial process, from designing the protocol and the case report forms or the CRF, and planning the analysis to analyzing and preparing interim and final clinical trial reports. Example dito sa clinical design na kailangan i-qualify ng sponsor natin is ng mga biostatisticians, clinical pharmacologists, and physicians. Now let's proceed to trial management, data handling, and record keeping. The sponsor should utilize appropriately qualified individuals to supervise the overall conduct of the trial. Handle the data, to verify the data, to conduct the statistical analysis, and to prepare the trial reports. Investigator selection. The sponsor is responsible for selecting the investigator or the institution. The sponsor and the investigator or the institution should sign the protocol or an alternative document to confirm this agreement. Allocation of responsibilities. Before initiating a trial, a trial, the sponsor should be define, establish, and allocate all trial-related duties and function within the organization or with external parties if involved. Compensation to subjects and investigators. The sponsors should provide insurance or should indemnify or the legal and financial coverage the investigator or the institution against claim arising from the trial, except for claims that arise from malpractice and or negligence. The sponsor's policies and procedures should address the cost of treatment of trial subjects in the event of trial-related injuries. Financing. The financial aspects of the trial should be documented in an agreement because financing is one of the most important aspect of responsibilities of sponsor. It should be in the agreement between the sponsors and the investigator institution. Notification or the submission to regulatory authorities. Before initiating the clinical trial, the sponsor should submit any required application to the appropriate authority for review, acceptance, or permission to begin the trial. The confirmation of review by the IRB or the IEC. The sponsor should obtain the following from the investigator or the institution. First, the name and address of the investigators, institution, IRB or the IEC. Second, the statements obtained from the IRB or the IEC that is organized and operates according to GCP and the applicable laws and regulations. The documented IRB or the IEC approval of a current copy of the protocol, written informed consent forms, or any other written information to be provided to subjects, subject recruiting procedures, and documents related to payments and compensation available to the subject. Information of investigational products. Before testing the product in the clinical phase, the sponsor should ensure that the sufficient safety and efficacy data from non-clinical studies or clinical trials are available to support human exposure by the route at potential dosages for the duration and in the trial population to be studied. And also, the sponsor should update the IB as significant new information becomes available but later than 1 year from the initial finalization date of the IB. The manufacturing, packaging, labeling, and coding investigational products. The sponsor should ensure that the investigational product include the active comparator and placebo is applicable, is manufactured in accordance with any applicable good manufacturing practices, and it is coded and labeled in a manner that protects the blinding, if applicable. In addition, the labeling should comply with the applicable regulatory requirements. Also, the sponsor should determine for investigational products acceptable storage temperature, storage condition, for example, the protections from light, storage times, reconstitutions, fluids and procedures, and also the devices. The investigational product should be packaged to prevent contamination and unacceptable deterioration during transport and storage. In blinded trials, The coding system for the investigational product should include a mechanism that permits rapid identification of the product in case of medical emergency but does not permit undetectable breaks of the blinding. If significant formulation changes are made in the investigational or comparator's product during the course of clinical development, the results of any additional studies of the formulated products, example its stability, dissolution rate, bioavailability, should be available before the use of the new formations in clinical trials. In addition, the additional studies are needed to assess whether these changes would significantly alter the pharmacokinetic profile of the product. Supplying and handling investigational products. The sponsor should be responsible for supplying the investigator with the investigational product only after obtaining approval from the IRB or the ISC and regulatory authority. The sponsor should ensure that the written procedures for investigational products address adequate and safe receipt. The sponsor should ensure timely delivery of investigational product to the investigator. To maintain records that document shipment, receipt, disposition, return, and destruction of the investigational product. To maintain a system for retrieving investigational product and documenting this retrieval product. For deficient product recall, reclaim after trial completion, expired product reclaim. To maintain a system for disposition of unused investigational product and for the documentation of this disposition. Also, it takes steps to ensure that the investigational product are stable over the period of use and to maintain sufficient quantities of the investigational product used in the trial to reconfirm specifications should this become necessary and maintain record of batch sample analysis and characteristics. To extend stability permits, samples should be retained either until the analysis of the trial data are complete or as required by the applicable regulatory requirements, whichever represents the longer retention period. Record access. The sponsor should ensure that it is specified in the protocol or other written agreement that the investigator or the institution should provide direct access to source data or documents for monitoring, audits, IRB, ISC review, and regulatory inspection. And also, the sponsor should verify that each subject has consented in writing to direct access to their original medication records or medical records for trial-related monitoring, audit, IRB, ISC record, and regulatory inspection. Safety information and adverse drug reacting reporting. The sponsor is responsible for the ongoing safety evaluation of the investigational product. The sponsor should promptly notify all concerned investigators, institutions, and the regulatory authority of finding that could affect the safety of the subject or alter the IRB or the ISC approval opinion to continue the trial. And the sponsor should expert the reporting of all adverse drug reaction that are both serious and unexpected to all concerned investigator, to the IRB or the ISC where required, and to the regulatory authority. And lastly, the sponsor should submit all safety updates and periodic reports to the regulatory authority as required by applicable regulatory requirements.
For the monitoring, the sponsor should develop a systematic, prioritized, risk-based approach to monitoring clinical trials. So the sponsor may choose on-site monitoring, a combination of on-site and centralized monitoring, or justified centralized monitoring. So the sponsor should document the rationale for the chosen monitoring strategy. Like, for example, the monitoring plan. So on-site monitoring is performed at the sites at which clinical trial is being conducted. So centralized monitoring is remote evaluation of accumulating data performed in timely manner, supported by appropriately qualified and trained persons, like for example, data managers and biostatisticians. So centralized monitoring processes provide additional monitoring capabilities that can complement and reduce the extent and/or frequently and onset monitoring, and help distinguish between reliable data and potentially unreliable data. So audit sponsors, for audit, the sponsor should perform the audit as a part of the implementing quality assurance. So the purpose of sponsors audit, which is independent of and separate from routine monitoring or quality control function, should be to evaluate trial conduct and compliance with the protocol, SOP, GCP, and applicable regulatory requirements. For premature terminations or suspensions of the trial, if a trial is prematurely terminated or suspended, the sponsor should promptly inform the investigators or the institution's IRB or IEC and the regulatory authority of the reasons for the terminations or suspension. For a clinical trial or the study reports, the sponsor should ensure that the clinical trial reports are prepared and provided to regulatory agency whether the trial is completed or prematurely terminated. So the sponsor should also ensure that in marketing applications, the clinical trial report should meet the standards of the ICH guidelines for the structure and content of a clinical study report. For the regulatory authority, like for example the FDA or the Food and Drug Administration, Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, is in charge of protecting public health by assuring the safety and the efficacy of drugs, so the biologics and the medical devices. Regulator achieves this through an extensive review process. So in this process, the sponsor works with the regulator to submit an application for investigational new drug or new drug applications for the new product. Regulator carefully evaluates the submitted documents, which tend to lead to either the approval or rejections. In addition to this review process, they also performs audits and inspections of any sections of a clinical research, including the sites, sponsors, or the IRBs or IRB. If the regulator discovers any problems or non-compliance, a warning letter may be sent mentioning corrective action that must be taken immediately by the stakeholder responsible. For the contract research organizations or the CRO, is a person or an organization, commercial, academic, or other contracted by the sponsor to perform one or more sponsors' trial-related duties and functions. Sponsor may transfer any or all of these sponsor trial-related duties and functions to contract research organizations. So any trial-related duty and functions that is transferred to and assumed by CRO should be specified in writing. So all the responsibilities of a sponsor in this chapter also apply to contract research organization to the extent that a CRO has assumed that the trial-related duties and functions of sponsor. For the auditor, the general responsibilities of an auditor include the following: coordinate and conduct internal system, adult and external investigative site or the vendor audits. Next, create, maintain, and revise departmental standard operating procedures, forms, and templates. Next is host audits by sponsor and regulatory inspectors. Next is coordinate, conduct, and track company-wide regulatory training, ICH, GCP, and the medical device. Lastly, develop training materials and applicable tests and guides. For the clinical research coordinator, the general responsibilities of the CRB or CRC include the following: clinical research coordinator or the CRC is an essential member of the research team. So the stakeholder who conducts the study, this member plays a critical role in organizing a site's participations in the expanding area of clinical trials. So the primary functions of the CRC is to manage and coordinate the smooth, accurate progress of clinical protocols from the planning stage to the study completions by acting as a liaison to other member stakeholders, including the investigator, the subject, the research site, the IRB, and the sponsor. The reason why this role holds such a great importance is because the CRC is at the center of the study process. Next, CRC assists in the development, review, and maintenance of the conducting a study in accordance with appropriate SOP, GCP, and regulatory guidelines. So this includes assisting in the review of the protocols, checking for protocol feasibility, preparing documents for IRB submissions, recruiting and screening study participants, obtaining informed consent from study subjects, facilitating continued participating or subjects, and tracking study progress while maintaining compliance. For a clinical research associate, the general responsibilities include coordinating with the ethics committee, which safeguards the rights, safety, and the well-being of all the trial subjects, managing regulatory authority applications and approval that oversee the research and marketing of a new existing drugs. Third, identifying and assessing the sustainability of facilities to be used as the clinical trial site. So identifying, selecting an investigator who will be responsible for the conduct of the trial at the trial site. Liaising with doctors, consultants, or investigators on conducting the trial. Next is setting up the trial sites, which includes the ensuring each center has the trial materials, including the trial investigation and medicinal products. Moreover, the training the site staff, the trial specific industry standards. Monitoring the trial throughout its duration, which involved visiting the trial sites on a regular basis. Verifying that data entered onto the CRF are consistent with patient clinical notes, source data, or document verifications. Next, collecting completed CRF from hospitals and general practices. Next is writing visit reports and filing and collating trial documentations and reports. Ensuring all unused trial supplies are accounted for, and closing down trial sites and completions of the trial, achieving study documentations and correspondence. For the Data and Safety Monitoring Board or Independent Data Monitoring Committee, the Data Safety Monitoring Board of Independent Data Monitoring Committee or IDMC that may be established by the sponsor to assist at intervals the progress of clinical trials, so the safety data and the critical efficacy and points, and to recommend to the sponsor whether to continue, modify, or stop a trial. So the IDMC should have written operating procedures and maintain written records of its meetings. For the participants, an individual who participates in clinical trial either as a recipient of the investigational products or as a control. So the general responsibilities of the participants include the following: respect the investigators, research stops, and the other participants, read the consent form and the other documents, ask questions if they do not understand something about the study or their rights and responsibilities as a research participants or need more information, and carefully weigh the risk and benefits when deciding whether to participate in the study, and refrain from signing the consent document documents until they believe that they understand its content and feel comfortable with their decision to participate. And following directions for proper use, dosing, and storage of the self-administered study medication, providing biological samples, and preparing for tests, procedures, or the examinations. Next is the following direction for abstaining from non-study related medications or other contraindicated medications or procedures. Know when the study begins and ends. So this is particularly important for an intervention trial that has a follow-up period after the intervention is completed. So show up at the scheduled appointment on time and inform the staff within a reasonable time if they need to reschedule an appointment. To provide truthful answers to questions asked during screening or enrollment and during the study. So inform the staff if other medical care is needed during the study. Inform the staff if there are questions they would rather not answer. So report pain, discomfort, nausea, dizziness, and other problems and symptoms they experience during the study. So keep the information about the study confidential if asked to do so. So keep the staff informed when the contact information, like for example, the phone number, address, or the changes. If they decide to withdraw from the study, inform the staff and follow the procedure for withdrawal.
So in continuation, we have the clinical trials documents. So documents are an essential part of the clinical trial where every activity performed in a clinical trial is captured. These documents are filed timely at the sites of investigator and sponsor as they aid in the proper management of a trial and provide evidence that the conduct of the clinical trial is compliant with the ICH, GCP, and all applicable regulatory requirements. Data are recorded in these documents timely, which are usually audited by the sponsor and inspected by the regulatory authority to confirm the integrity of collected data and validity of the trial conducted. A trial master file is established at the beginning of the trial at the investigator's or institution's site and at the sponsor's office where all the documents are placed promptly and maintained throughout the conduct of the trial. Before the final closeout of the trial, the monitor reviews both investigator or institution and sponsor files to confirm all documents are placed in appropriate files. These documents should be available for sponsor audits and regulatory inspections. The sponsor and investigator institution should record the location where all essential documents, including source documents, are placed. The storage system used during the trial and for achieving should provide for document identification, version history, search, and retrieval. These documents should be supplemented or reduced if not important and relevant in advance of trial initiation. Investigator's brochure. So the IB is the compiled information or data of clinical and non-clinical studies on the investigational products, which is related to the study of the investigational products in human subjects. This brochure contains the relevant and current scientific information that is provided to the investigator and other members involved in the trial before initiation of the clinical trial. This information may aid in recognizing and treating possible overdose and adverse drug reactions. So the purpose is to thoroughly familiarize the investigator with the appropriate use of the investigational products, its possible risk and adverse reactions, specific tests, observations, and precautions that may be needed for a clinical trial. A copy of updated investigator's brochure is also provided to the IRB or IEC. So the IB is updated whenever any significant information is available, and the same should be provided the investigator and IRB or the IEC. The contents of the investigator's brochure. We have the table of contents, the summary, introduction, the physical, chemical, and pharmaceutical properties and formulation, non-clinical studies, non-clinical pharmacology, pharmacokinetics and product metabolism in animals, and toxicology. So in effects in humans, we have three: the pharmacokinetics and product metabolism in humans, safety and efficacy, marketing experience. So summary of data and guidance for the investigator. The next is the confidentiality statement, which is optional. The signature page, which also an optional. Study protocol is a document describing the objectives, design methodology, statistical considerations, and organization of a trial, providing the background and rationale for the trial. So the protocol is shared with the investigators to make him or her thoroughly familiar with the appropriate use of the investigational products, which is then signed by the investigator for agreement with the sponsor. So the protocol is shared with the IRB IEC for approval or favorable opinion, and is also explained to other responsible members assisting in the trial. The whole clinical trial has to be conducted in compliance with the approved protocol. If there is any non-compliance with the protocol in the study, it is explained and documented by the designated person. So these are the contents of a trial protocol. First, general information, the background information, trial objectives and purpose, trial design, selection and withdrawal of subjects, treatment of subjects, assessment of efficacy, assessment of safety, statistics, direct access to source data or documents, quality control and quality assurance, ethics, data handling and record keeping, financing and insurance, publication policy, and the last is the supplements. So informed consent form. Informed consent is a process in which a subject is informed of each and every aspect of a clinical trial for which the subject confirms his or her voluntary participation. The informed consent form is the document where every aspect of the trial is written, which is signed and dated by the subject voluntarily, and the form is documented along with any written information provided to the subject. A copy of the signed and dated written informed consent form and any other written information is provided to the subjects before and during conduct of the trial. Before conduct of the trial, the IRB or IEC's written approval, favorable opinion is received on the informed consent form. The informed consent form must be in a language that is easy to understand by the subject and should be signed before participating in the trial. An impartial witness is required during the discussion of informed consent if a subject or legally acceptable representative is unable to read. The witness has to attest the information in the consent form and any other written information is correctly explained to the subject or the subject's legally acceptable representative and apparently understood and freely given by the subject or the subject's legally acceptable representative. A case report form, a printed or electronic, is designed to collect patient data in a clinical trial. Its development represents a significant part of the clinical trial and can affect study success. Site personnel capture the subject's data on the case report form, which is collected during their participation in a clinical trial. The International Conference on Harmonization Guidelines for Good Clinical Practice defines the case report form as a printed, optical, or electronic document designed to record all the protocol required information to be reported to the sponsor on each trial subject. Clinical Study Report. A clinical study report is a written description of a trial or study of any therapeutic, prophylactic, or diagnostic agent conducted in human subjects, in which the clinical and statistical description, presentations, and analysis are fully integrated. This is the final report submitted to the regulatory authority with document results and interpretation of the trial. The sponsor should prepare and provide the clinical study reports as per the standards of the ICH guideline to the regulatory authority as required by the authority after completion or termination of the trial. Clinical trial agreement. The financial aspect of the trial should be documented in an agreement between the involved parties, example, the sponsor and the investigator, the institution, CRO and the investigator, institution, sponsor and the CRO, and investigator, institution, and authorities were acquired.